Few weapons of war come to be known by their familiar name, and fewer still take on a mantle of fear, respect and awe, generating a reputation far outweighing their operational numbers. Few weapons of war have matched the Panzer Kampfwagen 6, the Tiger tank. Introduced to the German army in 1942, the Tiger immediately projected an aura of invincible armoured strength and power. British tank design had stagnated during the interwar years, many models retaining functions and tactics more suited to the previous conflicts. Most were designed to generally cover two separate main functions: heavy, slow and well armoured to accompany walking infantry, or fast, light and thinly armoured to act as a cavalry-type scouting machine. Either way, the guns used were usually of a small calibre, and the automotive power lacking and not always reliable. To match a heavy gun onto a robust chassis with a powerful motor and protect it with heavy steel armour produced enormous engineering challenges which were beyond the reach of a generally underfunded army still applying outmoded tactical thinking. In contrast to the British, the emergent German army, under the direction of Adolf Hitler and his chiefs of staff, took on the notion of lightning war or blitzkrieg and built up new ideas and technologies as Germany planned for a quick war, pushing the technical aspects of engineering further and further. Better tanks with better armour and deadly large calibre weapons which were to be used in a much more enterprising and coordinated manner proved their effectiveness as they swept through the Polish, Belgian, French and British forces in Northern Europe at the outset of the war. Miraculously, the panzers stopped short of Dunkirk, allowing Allied troops to escape across the Channel, leaving behind their shattered armour and support vehicles. After this initial blitzkrieg success for German armour and tactics in France and later North Africa, the balance between Axis and Allied armour slowly began to even out. British tank crews in their Crusaders and Valentines had become used to getting in dangerously close to their panzer opponents, often behind an artillery barrage or smokescreen, to allow their meagre 2-pounder guns any chance of penetrating the comparatively thick hulls of the Panzer IIIs or IVs. These necessarily risky tactics meant heavy losses for the British, both in men and materiel. Losses they could ill afford or replace. The cruel lessons were not lost on the British, but they lacked the manufacturing base to produce updated tank designs in sufficient numbers. Across the Atlantic, the almost dormant US Army also began to sit up and take notice. It finally acknowledged the importance of the tank in modern warfare and set about producing designs that could be manufactured quickly, easily and relatively cheaply. By 1942, the implementation of the US Lend-Lease program saw better tanks in the shape of Grants and Shermans arriving across the Atlantic in numbers to help redress the balance. Initially used by the British in North Africa, the new Swallow tank, soon to be known as the Sherman, acquitted itself well in several actions. With bigger guns and better tanks, the Allies began to feel confident about dealing with German armour. The appearance of one type of German tank, first in Russia and then later in 1942 in North Africa, shattered that confidence. Enter the Tiger I, a 56-ton heavily armoured killing machine centred around the awesome 88mm gun. No other tank in World War II gained such a fearsome reputation. The range and accuracy of its gun, coupled with the formidable strength of its armour, elevated the power of the Tiger to almost mystical proportions in the eyes of its opponents. Tank terror arrived once again to haunt Allied frontline troops. The Tiger concept was first broached in 1937, 2 years before the outbreak of war. Two of Germany's heavy manufacturing companies, Porsche and Henschel, being asked to submit designs and prototypes for a Durchbruchwagen, or breakthrough tank, that would be superior in all aspects to any known or predicted enemy vehicle, and integrate well into the ominously more powerful German army. Hitler and his staff chose the Henschel design. The Führer reportedly delighted at the size and power of the machine shown at the demonstration, a fitting representation of the power of the Third Reich. Production work began almost immediately, with some hulls being produced at the Krupp's works and delivered to the well-organised Henschel production factory. The factory maintained a good rate of output, around 140 maximum in 1 month, and featured some innovative production methods and impressive precision heavy machinery. Some 80 or so of the rejected original Porsche designs were converted into self-propelled guns, known as Ferdinands, used first in Russia and later Italy. Other variations on the Tiger hull were produced in very small numbers, such as the heavy siege howitzer or Sturm Tiger, shown here in its only significant action against the hapless Poles in the Warsaw Uprising. The Germans systematically flattened the city. The huge 760-pound projectile, here clearly seen leaving the barrel. It cost around 1 million Reichsmarks and 3.5 million man-hours to produce each Tiger. The level of engineering was such that processes could not be rushed or skimmed. Welds, joints, wheels, turret rings, and all main parts needed great skill and practice to ensure that they were assembled correctly. This care and precision helped give the Tiger its reputation for dealing with battle damage, but also made it difficult to maintain correctly under battle conditions. Despite its 5-man crew, huge cannon and heavy armour, Surprisingly, the only real design innovations in the layout were the interlocking and overlapped wheels, mounted on torsion bar suspension arms. Intended to increase cross-country performance and help support the heavy machine via its wide tracks, these features were to prove difficult in the years to come. As it rolled off the production line, it was more than a match for any Allied tank of its time. Its main armament was similar in power to the 88mm anti-aircraft gun. Originally designed to throw high explosive shells thousands of feet skywards to destroy enemy aircraft. It was later deployed on the ground as a feared and very effective anti-tank piece. Good engineering and design ensured that the considerable recoil forces from this powerful gun were handled well, something Allied tank engineers had struggled with in the past. The gun's size demanded a large turret to hold it. This weighed approximately 14 tons and needed a very substantial turret ring to support and turn the structure. The very high muzzle velocity of this gun, 2,650 feet per second, gave the projectile tremendous kinetic energy and a flat trajectory, hence being easier to aim and shoot. Shells from this gun were able to penetrate the armour of most Allied tanks, generally 5 to 7 centimetres thick, at ranges of up to 3,000 yards. That's almost 2 miles. The round also took only 3.9 seconds to reach its target. If you spotted the muzzle flash from a Tiger's gun about 2 miles away, you had less than 4 seconds to react. Penetration of an Allied tank's hull by a round had a catastrophic effect. If you were lucky, the round would pass between crew members and exit out the other side and miss vital mechanical parts. If not, the red-hot shot weighing 7 kilograms, travelling at supersonic speeds, ricocheted around the tank, killing and maiming the crew, and exploding any stored ammunition. When a tank brewed up, the machine literally blew itself apart, killing all inside unless they had managed to quickly wriggle out of the tiny escape hatches. The 75mm gun mounted in the Allied Sherman was adequate against most armoured vehicles, but had to get within 800 yards to have any chance of penetrating even the side or rear armour of the Tiger. The 15cm frontal armour required an almost point-blank strike from Allied 75mm. The Tiger's apparent invincibility and the protection offered by the armour gave its tank crews a great pride and confidence in their machine. With the advent of winter on the Russian steppes, a new threat to the German advance and indeed its survival on the Eastern Front appeared out of the factories beyond the Urals, the Russian T-34. This well-designed and easily mass-manufactured tank suddenly posed a serious threat to the previously successful German panzer armour. With its revolutionary sloped armour, powerful 7.5cm gun and wide tracks, it could fight well, take a lot of punishment, manoeuvre well over poor ground, and was available in great numbers. Russian winter may have stopped the German army outside of Moscow, but it was the T-34 that turned it back. The Tiger was hurriedly pressed into service in this theatre as a direct response to the new threat. The T-34 was an advanced design, but still no match for the Tiger's powerful cannon, and like the American Sherman, had to close to almost suicidal ranges to achieve any chance of penetrating the Tiger's armour. The fact that the Russian tanks were simplified in their design and made easy to manufacture meant that great numbers could be produced by the Soviet factories and therefore overwhelm the German forces. One example of the Tiger's protection and survivability was documented after an engagement on the Eastern Front against hull-down Russian T-34 tanks and several anti-tank guns at a well-defended strongpoint. The engagement lasted 6 hours. The Tiger's cupola was hit twice by 4.5 centimetre rounds, which virtually destroyed the commander's views through his vision blocks. External smoke discharges peppered by enemy fire discharged themselves. Their smoke was then sucked into the Tiger's vents and the crew couldn't function properly. Creeping ever closer to their objective, the intensity of fire increased as a deafening cacophony of sharp clangs, deep booms, clouds of smoke, and bright flashes echoed around the turret. At almost point-blank range, the main gun was hit by a 7.6 centimetre anti-tank round. Part of the mantle broke, and the gun was forced back into the recoil position. A similar shell penetrated the engine compartment, setting it ablaze, but this was quickly extinguished. Even a heavy charge placed on the roof by enemy infantry did not penetrate, but gave out a huge boom and a lot of heat. Six hours later, having achieved their objective, the Tiger still managed to travel 60 kilometers under its own power to its next assignment, and the external damage was assessed. There were 227 hits from anti-tank rifles, 14 hits from 5.7 centimetre anti-tank guns, and 11 hits from 7.62 centimetre anti-tank guns. Proof indeed that the Tiger could handle almost anything the Allies could throw at it. Tigers left the factory painted in a number of different base colours. Their distinctive camouflage was applied by the unit when in the field, as this gave the commanders the chance to match the tank to its particular surroundings. Paint was taken from a range of standard colours supplied by the German War Ministry, and mixed and matched as seen fit by the unit in the field. Reference was made to noted schemes of various optimum patterns, and combinations drawn from successful previous armoured engagements. For example, in their first Tiger action near Leningrad in August 1942, Schwerpanzer Abteilung 502 began their Russian campaign as dark field grey. By January 1943, their sister company 503 had changed their scheme to match the winter snows covering the landscape as they fought their way to Rostov. As can be seen from this interior shot of a factory-fresh early Tiger tank turret, the breech section of the 88mm cannon took up a lot of internal space. The gun's balancing and recoil system can be seen, as can the gunner's vision block and escape hatch. To protect the commander's vision, a flash shield was installed to his right, and on his left, a traverse hand wheel linked to the gunner's duplicate control to help with accurate aiming of the gun and the turret. Tiger crews worked very closely together to fight their tank, under the well-trained directions of their commander, who sat in his ventilated turret with his gunner at his feet, able to use the excellent vision of the raised cupola to search for targets and relay his instructions via the internal radio, as well as the occasional kick on the appropriate shoulder, should internal communications be disabled. Selections from various Tiger tank instruction manuals spell out some basic principles for the crew. The frontal armour of the Tiger is virtually impregnable by enemy tanks until within ranges of 800 metres. This can be increased by angling the position of the Tiger when faced with an enemy gun. Turning the tank through 5 to 10 degrees can increase the effective width of the armour by around 3 centimetres. This means that to penetrate, the enemy has to come 1,000 metres closer. The closer he has to get, the easier it is to knock him out. Using the mealtime system to afford maximum protection, and being sure that all involved in the action understand the shouted commands, means that the tank should at all times present its most favourable angle for protection. This diagram from one of the fighting manuals helps show the weaker areas between the Tiger's strongest points and where the enemy shells will be most likely to strike at the most direct angle. When faced with more than one opponent, keeping meal times to him allowed the Tiger to engage and destroy the other, then traverse the turret and destroy the first. Using this range work and the cloverleaf method meant that the commanders could calculate how close to allow the enemy to approach from different directions. To increase the effectiveness of the main weapon, it was integrated with a sighting and ranging system with excellent optics and simple yet accurate range finding over approximately 3,000 yards. The accuracy and hitting power of the main gun was also incorporated into the unit's tactical methods with the integrated Panzer unit. Tank commanders were given strict instructions on how to most effectively fight their tank. One of the main aspects was that the Tiger's gun was not to be fired when the tank was in motion, thus ensuring greater accuracy over longer distances and maximising the effect of the large cannon. At the outset of the war, as the Tiger was under development, various combat deployment tactics were devised. These worked well under ideal conditions with sufficient numbers of Tigers. But, as the war evolved, battlefield conditions, availability and shortages produced a more piecemeal approach. In the initial stages of the war, a typical recommended field deployment of Schwerpunkt-Abteilung 501 and 503 consisted of 4 platoons or Zugs, each comprising 2 Tigers and 2 Panzer IIIs, with an additional company troop of another Tiger and 2 more Panzer IIIs. These Tiger formations appear as a nasty surprise for the Russians at Leningrad in 1942, and later in North Africa, where the Allies once again had to rethink their tactics about how to deal with German armour. The 7th Panzer Regiment, sent to boost Rommel's campaign in Tunisia, appeared in Afrika Korps Gelb, or Brun-Gelb camouflage, in March 1943. The Tiger's superiority and the effectiveness of good German tactics was also demonstrated at Magnassi Pass in North Africa, where 4 Tigers of the 7th Panzer Regiment knocked out over 40 Shermans and Grants of the American 1st Armoured Division in one brief engagement. A reputation began to be established, and a kill ratio of 10-1 was to remain depressingly constant for the Allies, even rising to 18-1 in the great tank battles of the Eastern Front. Early deployment of Tigers with units such as Grossdeutschland, Das Reich and Totenkopf followed the original highly successful tactics. However, by reacting to the changing fortunes of war and displaying their characteristic improvisational and organisational skills, the German generals and field commanders under General Heinz Guderian reformed extensively the existing and new panzer battalions to gain maximum effect from the Tiger's impressive features and implement the lessons learned from a changing battlefield. Company commanders were issued a manual for deployment and training in May 1943, which spelled out clearly how the precious heavy tanks were to be used. These were 1. To attack enemy defensive positions, including defensive works and engineered prepared defences. 2. To provide first wave or breakthrough attacks, resulting in fewer losses of supporting vehicles and the taking of the battlefield. 3. The defence against or the attack of heavy enemy tanks and vehicles from the longest ranges, allowing lesser armour to deal with standard enemy tanks, thus allowing fewer losses in standard armour types. Orders relating to the deployment of the Tiger's weapon capability were strictly adhered to reduce loss of such important vehicles and to increase its fighting effectiveness. In Russia during the summer of 1943, at the Battle of Kursk, Das Reich employed a variety of camouflage schemes, as did other units. At the Great Battle of Kursk, following a build-up of forces and intense planning, the Tigers were used as they were initially intended, and at almost full strength. What became the largest tank battle of all time was planned by German High Command to cut the attacking Soviet salient, push the Soviets back, and regain previously captured ground. 56 Tigers in total were available, 14 with Grossdeutschland, the others with SS Panzer Corps. In all, there were 2,700 tanks committed to the battle by the German command. They had trained hard for months for this, integrating Tigers with other units, practicing radio and tactical maneuvers so that they could become more effective. The units were very strong and confident, despite the pain of earlier defeats near Moscow. The Tigers were deployed at the front in Kiel or Panzerglock formation to batter their way forward through the Russian positions, with the lesser Panzer IIIs and IVs following behind or on the flanks. The Tigers advanced past the initial defences, encountering huge numbers of enemy tanks that tried to get as close as possible to their opponents. In the open countryside of the steppes, time and time again the 88mm kept the Russian tanks at bay. The T-34 commanders were instructed to rush the Tiger formations, get in close, and use their faster rotating turret to fix their target. The fights often lasted 6 to 8 hours, and could become a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Opposing tanks manoeuvring to present the strongest side to the enemy and seek out his weak points, taking every advantage of available cover and accurately judging when to move, when to fire, and when to retreat. Appalling losses were wreaked upon the Russian forces by the Tigers of Grossdeutschland Division and the SS Panzer Corps. But the numerical superiority of the Russian forces and their strong defence works meant that hard-won ground had to be given up as the German offensive lost momentum. Despite being accredited with the highest kill ratio, many Tigers were destroyed, along with most of the rest of the German tanks. Smashed by the coordinated Russian defences and overwhelming forces, the Tiger was never again to be used in great numbers. During the late winter and early spring of 1944 in Russia, units such as Schwerpanzerabteilung 509, 501, 502 and 507 used a number of camouflage schemes to reflect the changing weather and terrain conditions.
Hauptmann Philipp, 94 Abschüsse.
The Nazi propaganda machine, under the direction of Joseph Goebbels, recognized their own heroes and promptly referred to them as aces, elevating their status and profile in newsreels and other propaganda material. Tank ace Michael Wittmann in his Tiger established his reputation on the Eastern Front, becoming responsible for 16 Russian T-34s in one day alone. His combined Eastern and Western front tally was to top 130 enemy tanks. The crew of the Tiger were regarded as the elite troops of the armoured forces, entrusted with 1 million Reichmarks of high-tech engineering and the pride of the Nazi war machine. Their uniforms varied according to the theatre operations, unit and period of the conflict. The SS Tiger crews wore their black SS uniforms on more formal occasions, the pink piping on the epaulets denoting their tank crew status. When in action, a variety of different clothing was worn to suit the conditions. In 1944, heavy leather jackets and trousers ordered for the U-boat fleet arrived, of little use now to the blockaded submarine force. These were transferred to the Tiger crews, but were very unpopular, being heavy and cumbersome inside the tank. More popular with the operational crews were the camouflaged HBT drill uniforms, which allowed good movement inside the tank and a degree of cover on the outside. The intercom radio system can be seen here with the two-way switch and the throat mic. In common with tank crews worldwide, practicality was paramount. To crew and fight the Tigers, at least 19 companies were formed or adapted during the course of the war. Every unit had its own distinctive markings. Many SS troops earned a fanatical reputation. The 3rd SS Panzer Regiment or Totenkopf fought their way across Russia with their Tiger Is, and, as the war reached its bloody conclusion, were upgraded to Tiger IIs. With these even heavier tanks, they fought in the streets of Berlin, defending the Führer's bunker until the very end. The 1st SS Panzer Regiment, Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, was one of tank ace Michael Wittmann's companies. One of the earliest companies was Schwerpanzer Abteilung 501. Under the initial command of Major Loider, the regiment was reformed after surrender in Tunisia, and saw action on the Eastern Front after training in France. As the necessities of war demanded, the units were often amalgamated or reformed to suit the situation. As the course of the war changed and the Germans were less on the offensive, Tigers were seldom used in large-scale attacking formations. Allied air superiority and rocket-firing aircraft such as Typhoons and Mustangs made formations of armour in open countryside a dangerous proposition. As the Allies landed in Normandy, their aerial umbrella extended even further to cast a dark shadow over the use and movement of German armour. Sometimes forced to become a heavily fortified mobile bunker, the Tiger was often deployed from camouflaged ambush positions, using the range of its gun to deadly effect. It was from one such ambush in Normandy that Wittmann's Tiger was credited with almost single-handedly halting the British 7th Armoured Division, destroying 75 of their tanks and many more of their vehicles in one brief encounter at Villers-Bocage. Eventually his Tiger was stopped, with its track blown off, and Wittmann was forced to retreat back to his unit HQ, back to a hero's welcome. As the Allied Normandy beachhead grew, German resistance stiffened. Especially around Caen, where Montgomery's British troops drew in the enemy armour in a grinding battle of attrition. In July, the breakout Battle of Goodwood had run out of steam, encountering heavy losses against dug-in German armour, including many Tigers whose commanding view of the open terrain and long range again dominated the battlefield. A second attempt, Operation Totalize, was made in August to force the Germans back and to close the neck of the Falaise pocket. Normandy saw several units adopting a thicker pattern of camouflage, partly to help hide themselves in the pillbox or ambush row, but also to shield themselves from the deadly Yebos or fighter bombers of the British and American air forces. The Allies by now had a new weapon with which to counter the Tiger. Hectic preparations before D-Day resulted in the British being able to match the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun into the Sherman tank. Crews had little time to train, and only a few were ready for the Normandy campaign. Designated the Firefly, these were generally used in a troop of 5 other Shermans equipped with the standard 75mm gun. One such British troop was caught up in the action near Saint-Aignan, north of Falaise, where after a hectic night march the troop found cover in a local orchard. A small formation of enemy tanks, 3 Tigers, were spotted moving across their field of view, about 1,200 yards away, and immediately the Firefly crew was ordered to target the rear tank of the enemy formation. When the rear Tiger got within 800 yards, the 17-pounder of the Firefly got off 2 shots, penetrating the side armour and setting him on fire. The remaining Tigers presented their mealtimes positions to the enemy. The Firefly quickly got off another shot, and the second Tiger burst into flames. The first Tiger was trying to find cover when he was hit by 2 rounds from the Firefly's gun and started to burn. Like all tanks brewing up, the explosion caused by the internal ammunition igniting blew the tank to pieces. The action lasted only 12 minutes. Just after this, the Firefly was hit by an unseen round and began to burn, the crew all escaping quickly. It was only later in the Normandy campaign that evidence showed that the lead Tiger was that of Michael Wittmann, the Tiger Ace. A legend had met its end. Actions such as this helped slow the Allied advance, and the Falaise pocket was not successfully closed until some considerable time later. But still, the carnage caused by the Allied Air Force to the unprotected German forces in the Falaise Gap was beyond belief. Despite its awesome reputation and acknowledged killing power, the Tiger tank itself had several operational problems, including actually getting to the battle area. The wide tracks, necessary to support the great weight of the machine, could not be used for any length of time on metalled roads. The forces generated would simply shatter the tracks or break the wheels. The suspension layout caused innumerable problems to crews in the field. Mine damage or excessive wear and tear on the road wheels meant a complex and lengthy repair task. Often the harsh field conditions, frozen mud, sand or ice, caused crews to miss out some of the critical steps involved in routine maintenance. This was compounded by the attentions of enemy fire and the increasing need to get to the battle area quickly. The lack of adherence to the strict maintenance procedures simply meant that the tank would fail in some way in the very near future, often under the duress of battle, and have to be abandoned and destroyed by its crew. Because the Tiger with its tracks was wider than the Panther and other tanks, the vehicle would not fit through many railway bridges when moving by rail to their area of deployment. They therefore had to be swapped for the narrower transport tracks, and 4 per side of the heavy road wheels removed, before the vehicle drove onto the flatbed railcar. In good conditions, and with the required mechanical and vehicular support, this operation would take at least 4 hours if done properly. The operation had to be completed in reverse at the destination. If things were rushed due to enemy action or local conditions, the resultant mechanical breakdown would occur sooner rather than later. The field support for Tigers diminished during the course of the war, as resources grew slimmer and the Allied air superiority simply blew all road and rail traffic to pieces. A damaged Tiger required at least 2 18-ton prime movers to tow it back to the support area, more if the conditions were poor. In some cases where the recovery teams could not operate, damaged Tigers were pulled by others in the troop, usually in pairs. This frequently resulted in the transmissions of the towing tanks being damaged, the heavy and over-engineered powertrains, steering mechanisms and gearboxes not being capable of withstanding the strain of twice their rated loads. In one documented case in Italy, 14 Tigers of 3 Squadron 508 Heavy Tank Battalion were dispatched to attack American forces in Italy racing towards Rome. However, very shortly into the mission, for unknown tactical reasons, the squadron was ordered to retreat. Due partly to poor management and overzealous towing of damaged Tigers, only 8 tanks got back to their assembly area, with 4 in fighting order. Immediately, 1 was hit by anti-tank fire and destroyed by its crew. Another 2 developed gearbox trouble while manoeuvring, leaving just 1 Tiger in operable fighting condition. If the crews had chance to carry out the proper maintenance, and if adequate recovery facilities had been present, the situation would have ended differently. Despite these operational setbacks, the demoralizing impact of this seemingly invincible adversary grew within Allied soldiers, especially the hapless tank crews. Such was the reputation that if an Allied tank group or squadron was engaged by enemy tanks, it was assumed they were all Tigers, and immediate evasive action was taken. Understandably, the presence of a Tiger had an effect on Allied morale out of all proportion to the numbers of Tigers actually deployed. Tiger was introduced when the tide of war began to change for Germany. It made a decisive machine to add punch to an offensive, was also a formidable defensive weapon, but the problems it faced were often beyond its control. Lack of resources caused by the Allied air offensive meant that never enough could be built. As the Allied air power destroyed the transport infrastructure, the tanks were often not available where they were needed most. Mechanical failure caused by long route marches increased, and with a fuel consumption of 3 miles per 5-gallon jerrycan, petrol supply became a problem. Most damaging of all was that it had become a numbers game. The Russians produced tens of thousands of T-34s. The Americans tens of thousands of Shermans. Germany was able to produce less than 1,500 Tiger 1s until they were forced to abandon production in August 1944. Then production was switched to the even heavier Tiger 2, building on the lessons learned from the Tiger 1 and the Panther and their adversaries. If an Allied or Russian tank crew had to bail out of a damaged vehicle, they knew they could be back in action in another tank within a day, and their stricken vehicle could be repaired and reused very quickly, or just discarded. If a Tiger crew had to abandon their vehicle, they were ordered to destroy it, to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. They also knew there would be no immediate replacement, if any. This was a contributory factor in the Tiger mythology. Destroyed before surrender, few were left at the end of the war, the numbers remaining pitifully at odds with their immense reputation. Like any rare predator which finds its method of operating increasingly restricted in the face of numerically superior odds, eventual defeat is inevitable. Contributing to the Tiger mythology and mystique, surviving examples are rare and infrequently seen. One known early example captured by the British in Tunisia is undergoing full restoration at Bovington Tank Museum in England. Another appears rather menacingly as a fixed roadside memorial at Vimoutiers in France. An infrequently running Tiger is also to be found in the military museum at Saumur, on the banks of the River Loire. Others are also found in former Eastern Bloc countries, and as these areas open up, perhaps more examples of this once all-conquering monster will appear once again on the international stage.